Huddle up. It's me, Angel Reese. You can't beat the post-game burger and fries, right? Know what else you can't beat? The Angel Reese Special. Let's break it down. My favorite barbecue sauce, American cheese, crispy bacon, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun, of course. And don't forget the fries and a drink. It's gonna be a high C for me. Sound good? All you have to do to get it is beat me in a one-on-one. I'm just playing. Get the Angel Reese Special at McDonald's now. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating restaurants for a limited time.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free Second Look review. Second Look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
Hello and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. It's Friday, the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, and it's time for Friday 5. We're going to be having a look at the top 5 stories that have made the news at the City Ground over the past week. I'm Steven Toplis, and in a moment I'll be joined by Baz, but for now let's go over to Rich on the 1865 news desk.
Hi, it's Rich here, still sitting in for Jamie at the 1865 news desk with big fat sloppy kisses and your news bulletin for Valentine's Day, the 14th of February. Here are the big stories from the City Ground this week. Firstly, confirmation that Taiwo Awoniyi is battered and bruised but will eventually be okay after getting a thump to the head in Forest's match at Exeter. After the game, Nuno Espirito Santo confirmed the big striker has a broken nose and a possible concussion, but although he was groggy, he was up and walking and celebrated with his teammates as they won the penalty shootout. The rather squeaky win over the Grecians has set the Reds up for an encounter with Premier League Ipswich in the next round. You can hear our match report from Tuesday night in your podcast feed, and credit to George and all of the away fans for making such a long journey on a Tuesday night. Now, it's also been a busy old week for the Forest women's team. Just as this podcast is being recorded, they're playing the second of 3 matches at the City Ground in just 7 days, as they take on Rugby Borough before playing Wolves on Sunday. Last weekend's match saw the Reds record a thumping 4-0 victory over Liverpool Feds, with goals from Charlie Wellings, Millie Chandarana and 2 from Mel Johnson. The result put Forest 3 points clear of second-placed Wolves with a thumping goal difference of plus 50. A slightly different story coming third. The Gambling Commission are writing to 3 Premier League clubs, including Forest, to remind them of their responsibilities to ensure that, to quote BBC News, unlicensed gambling websites promoted on football shirts cannot be accessed from Great Britain, even if the users are engaging with a VPN. The Reds' main shirt sponsor, Cayenne Sports, are not licensed in this country, and the Commission has also written to Everton and Leicester regarding Stake and BC Game, who sponsor their first team apparel. There's obviously another issue going on with Stake. If you haven't checked it out, then the BBC and Athletic are both reporting on that. As a reminder, gambling companies will not be permitted as the main shirt sponsor after next season, although they may still advertise on sleeves and on advertising hoardings. Our fourth story covers the Forest B team, who were held at home to Derby in a 1-1 draw on Monday night. All eyes were on new signing Joel Ndala, who was making his debut on loan from Man City, with a view to a permanent transfer. Although Ndala didn't score, he looks lively and promising. The result leaves Forest just below their woolly counterparts in Premier League 2, with the Reds currently 18th in a 26-team league. In other news, the draw has been made in the knockout stage of the Premier League International Cup, with Forest youngsters due to play Danish side, hang on, brace yourselves, FC Midtjylland, with the date of the fixture still to be confirmed. Apologies for my pronunciation there to any of our Danish listeners. And last but not least, in today's roundup, Forest's first team will return to Premier League action away at Fulham tomorrow. Given the 3-hour-long encounter in Devon and the level of performance, I think we can take it as read that Nuno will probably revert to his regular first team as much as possible. In his press conference, the gaffer reported that Callum Hudson-Odoi is in with a chance of playing at Fulham, but Big Taiwo is unlikely to play due to concussion protocols. Carlos Miguel will be missing, however, with the convenient hamstring injury picked up against Exeter, which means a return to the bench for Wayne Hennessy. Nuno stated that his fellow Portuguese, Marco Silva, and his team Fulham have, quote, quality and energy all over the place. And the emphasis has been on recovery for the players after the toils in Devon. We're trying to get them back to normal, he said. Lastly, he also reported he's positive about negotiations over a new contract for Ola Aina. Happy days. So those are your top 5 stories for this week, and this has been Rich Ferraro at the 1865 News Desk. Now it's back to Stephen in the studio.
Thanks, Rich. Now let's have a look at those stories in a bit more detail. I'm joined by Baz. Hello, Baz.
Hiya.
So let's start then with the news on Taiwo Awoniyi. Nuno Espirito Santo says that the striker will be okay after he received a bang to the head in Forest's FA Cup game at Exeter in midweek. The front man went off with a broken nose and suspected concussion late on in the game at St James's Park. Although he was groggy, he was up and walking, and he celebrated with his Forest teammates after the Reds won the penalty shootout. So good news, Baz, that Awoniyi should be okay and that his injury isn't as serious as was suspected, because Forest are light in the striker department, and there's a bit of an irony there that after all the talk of needing to sign somebody in the transfer window to bolster our forward options, one of our strikers ends up having to leave a game early and potentially be out for a couple of matches.
Well, I mean, well, first of all, I only watched it on the telly, but it was horrible. It was pretty, like, the way his head was lolling about on the floor was quite sickening. So I was fearing the worst. And it's very good news that it doesn't seem to be as bad as it at first appeared. But it was quite, so we've spent all this time speculating about getting a striker in over January because of the potential for an injury to Chris Wood. But actually losing Taiwo would be just as bad, because suddenly there's even more pressure on Wood. You can't even take him off after 75, 80 minutes. If he's run himself into the ground. So yeah, it's very good news that hopefully it's only going to be a couple of matches that he's out for.
And we spoke about it in the match report, but it was good to see him on the score sheet in midweek, and he took his goal very well. So hopefully when he is back on the pitch, that will give him a bit of a boost, because yeah, I think with the Chris Wood situation, he's established himself as first choice, but we do need Taiwo there to carry some of the load, because it would be a huge risk asking Chris Wood to play every minute of the rest of the season, which is basically what would happen if Taiwo was not available. So it could leave us in a potentially vulnerable position, but good news that Taiwo seems to be okay and will recover pretty swiftly.
A couple of little things to add to that. So first of all, on the TV, whoever it was doing the commentary, they made the point that when Taiwo scored, was it against Wolves?
Yeah.
That he'd noticed the way the entire team went over to celebrate with him, which I can remember thinking at the time, that's an absolutely brilliant thing to see. But I was just thinking, like, in terms of contingencies, if something did happen to one of those two strikers and they were out for a month or so or whatever, I was thinking the other week, it might be worth chucking Jota Silva up front, because it'll be less of a liability up there. He could actually, the way he charges about, it could actually be useful against teams that play out from the back, which is most of them. And he does seem to have an eye for goal, and he's played up front. He plays as a striker in Portugal as well, so it's not something brand new to him. So it might be worth considering that.
Yeah, that's an interesting shout, because again on Tuesday night, I think he was a quite frustrating figure for Forest fans at times with the way that he throws himself to the ground or loses possession. I know he had the opportunity late on that he made for himself, that he struck against the post. Actually was a very decent strike in the circumstances. But yeah, that could be an interesting workaround to share some of the load amongst our strikers and our attacking options.
Playing, but it's I'd say, yeah, I've read that Ramon Sosa's played up front as well, but he's even more slight than Jota Silva. So,
yeah, I don't see that one happening. Although a good finish on Tuesday, granted. And then the win against Exeter on penalties means that Forest go into the 5th round of the FA Cup, and they'll play Ipswich. So it's an all Premier League tie. I think on the whole, Forest will be pretty happy with that draw. They beat Ipswich 1-0 not too long ago, and we all know Ipswich's struggles in the league this season. So, it could be a good opportunity to progress even further in the Cup.
Well, I mean, I'd say of all the sort of lower half teams I've seen us play this season, Ipswich were by far the best and put us most to the sword. So I don't think it's going to be an easy game, especially if this is like their hope for something this season as well. So, but then I also got to sing "You've Lost That Loving Feeling" to Ed Sheeran, and I might get to do that again. So,
and a quick word for all of the Forest fans who made that long trip down to Exeter on Tuesday, and probably even longer trip coming back in the middle of the night after the game finished post 11 o'clock. So, to echo Richard's words, a big well done and thumbs up to the Forest fans in Exeter. On to our next story then, and it involves the Forest women's team. They are, as we're recording, playing the second of 3 games at the City Ground in just 7 days as they face Rugby Borough before facing Wolves on Sunday. But last weekend they beat Liverpool Feds 4-0. Charlie Wellings, Millie Chandarana and 2 from Mel Johnson, giving Forest the win. They are 3 points clear of second place Wolves in the league and have an incredible goal difference of plus 50 at this stage of the season. And more good news and more good form from the Forest women's team. They're flying and it looks like they're going to be moving up a division this season.
Absolutely. I mean, that number of goals is just incredible. It's if I didn't live miles away, then yeah, I'd definitely be going that because you just guarantee goals.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Our next story moves in a slightly different direction, more to off-pitch matters. So Forest, alongside 2 other Premier League clubs, have been contacted by the Gambling Commission, and this is to remind the club of their responsibilities around unlicensed gambling websites and the promotion of them on football shirts. So Forest's main shirt sponsor, Kion Sports, are not licensed in this country, and the Commission's also written to Everton and Leicester regarding their sponsors, Stake and BC Game. Now, the season after next is when gambling companies won't be allowed to be the main shirt sponsor for Premier League teams anymore. And again, it just comes back to this debate between ethics and business, doesn't it? Because we know most recently with Forest in 2022-23 when we didn't have a shirt sponsor for a big chunk of that season after we got promoted to the Premier League. The reason being that the club felt nobody was paying what was worth to sponsor Forest. Gambling companies generally do pay and do stump up the money. this again feeds into that debate, doesn't it, between money and ethics?
Yeah, and I mean, when Kayun were announced, I can remember reading about them saying that they had like a rented office somewhere in Hertfordshire or something like that, and that was their UK base, and that gave them legitimacy to be a shirt sponsor. But apparently, they don't even have that anymore, which is fair enough. And I mean, I can remember there's been a few clubs. Everton were one at one point where they've had Chinese sponsors, and that was part of their like commercial strategy to sort of grow the brand overseas. But I don't think that Kayun being our sponsors is anything to do with that kind of thing. It's just, let's take the money. I don't want to be. I don't know about gambling, and I don't know enough about it, and whatever the dangers, how much of a difference it makes having a sponsor like that. I know that you wouldn't have a cigarette company on the front. You don't have beer on the front anymore. Whether that's right or wrong, I have not thought about it enough, but I do think they always came across as quite a shady company to have on the front of the shirt. And after this half a season with no sponsor, and then the next half of the season with UNHCR, it's a bit of a come down in that way.
In terms of what Forest do with their sponsorship and whether that will change after this season remains to be seen. But it's an interesting debate to have nevertheless. And equally, it'll be interesting to see how Premier Leagues approach it from 2026 onwards.
I'm also kind of intrigued, as someone who works in tech, as how the Premier League expects these sites to block people. It's just like, well, just make it happen. I said it should, so therefore it has to. But anyway, that's an entirely different discussion.
So on to our next story then, and this involves the Forest B team, who were held at home by Derby on Monday night, a 1-1 draw. And new signing Joel Ndala, who made his debut on loan from Man City, was the big piece of news from Forest's point of view. And he didn't score, but he had a lively game and certainly caught the eye. The result leaves Forest below Derby in Premier League 2. The Reds are currently 18th out of 26 teams. But in other news, Forest are to play Danish side FC Nordsjælland in the Premier League International Cup in the knockout stages of that competition. I'll be honest with you, Baz, I didn't even know this competition existed. So no. Shows you how much attention I've been paying. I think we're all learning something tonight.
Yeah. Obviously, it must be very exciting for them. I didn't know the competition existed. I didn't even know that place in Denmark existed. But it's got to be a good thing for them to get that extra bit of experience and a bit of an away day as well.
Yeah, and I think that looking a bit more into this competition it is great experience for Forest youngsters and gives them an opportunity to face teams from the continent and gain a different kind of experience that they would get to just playing against domestic sides. And I think we have to look as well in terms of things like PSR, in terms of how Forest build their squads in the future, trying to get as much useful experience for our young players is key to helping them to then graduate into the first team. The PSR issue means you might have to sell some players to make that pure profit, but it is also important to have your homegrown players coming through and playing for your team, whatever the level. And I think that's the one thing that Forest, perhaps, if we're going to be critical on anything, is trying to find that pathway for academy players a bit better.
I mean, the whole thing about us having an academy player in the first team squad for however many years, and then suddenly Yates was suspended and we brought in Zach Abbott pretty much just to keep that record going. But you think about it, a few years ago, it would have been relatively simple to find someone to replace Yates, although obviously we're at a much lower level then. It'll be nice to open up that pathway beyond just Zach Abbott. Joe Gardner's probably the next one.
I suppose it's just a circumstance, isn't it? Forest getting into the Premier League how they did and needing to bring in that Premier League experience and the players they did.
And it's more of a step up for the young as well.
It is, yeah. But hopefully more competitions like this and more games like this for our academy prospects will open up those pathways into the first team in the future. And we will finish today's roundup by looking ahead to Forest's game away at Fulham on Saturday as Nuno's side return to Premier League action. After the marathon FA Cup tie in Devon, we can probably assume that there'll be plenty of changes to Nuno's team. He made a fair few changes at St James's Park, and we'll probably see a few more of the first team regulars returning for this one. Carlos Miguel won't play. We didn't think he would anyway, but he's got a hamstring injury that he picked up against Exeter. So that means Wayne Hennessy will return to the bench. Callum Hudson-Odoi is in with a chance of playing, though, and hopefully we do see him back on the pitch, perhaps even as a substitute, because I think with the way that we play and the fact that we are so good on the break, particularly as well away from home, having a player like Callum Hudson-Odoi who looks after the ball so well but is also a threat in terms of goals and assists, I think he's been a key performer for us, and I think we've missed him a little bit in the last couple of games. Yeah,
I think as well it's I think Elanga's not quite as effective on the left as well, so he gets shoved out to the left so that Jota Silva can come in on the right. And I think he's probably a little bit more effective on the right just because of the way he approaches the ball. And Hudson-Odoi obviously loves that cutting in and shooting. So, I hope he's... I think they're playing it quite coy with him. I suspect he could well start. But it'll be good to have him back, definitely. Fulham's an interesting one as well because it's probably Nuno's biggest tactical mistake of the season when we played him at home, where he went 4-4-2, tried the idea being, I presume, to try and press them high up the pitch, and it just didn't work. Although we only lost by one, wasn't it? It's a penalty.
Yeah, and a bit of a controversial one at that. So we know how good Marco Silva's team can be. Forest have been on the receiving end of a few beatings at Fulham in recent seasons, none more so than a 5-0 last season at Craven Cottage. But the way Forest have been playing, I mean, Exeter aside, they've got to feel confident against anybody. And it's games like Fulham away which are really good tests for this Forest team and whether they can continue their good league form.
And again, Fulham being at home, they're just going to have that encouragement to try and come down. They are a team that likes to play with the ball, and that might just play into our hands. I mean, the exact opposite of Exeter.
Yeah. Do you think anybody at Exeter played themselves into contention for the game against Fulham? I mean, I'd probably say the ones who came off the bench, but they're the first team regulars. So
yeah, I thought Sangari did well. Not just because of the quality of the opposition, but it was the fact that he was trying to pick. He did it a few times where he tried to pick out the pass straight up the line, straight through the centre, rather, trying cutting between their centre halves, which was a very incisive pass when it worked. It made 2 goals. But it was also, maybe he wouldn't get the chance to do that quite as often against Fulham. But I thought he showed sparks of why we wanted to sign him.
Yeah, and he's another one who has been in and out of the team due to injury. And I suppose much like Taiwo Wanyi, he needs that game time to gain that sharpness and get back to the level of player that he was before. But Forest have been playing so well, and players in their respective positions have been playing so well that they haven't had much of a look in.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sangari's not really had a chance. He's not really had the fitness more than anything to get an extended run in the side in 18 months he's been with us. So it'd be nice for him to get it. But I would say as well, the other game the other week, it's completely gone out of my mind whoever we played the other week, when Danilo started, just having him back made a massive difference.
Yeah, against Brighton,
Yeah, Brighton, that was it. You could see that Well, and I've said this in the match report, nothing against Ryan Yates and Nico Dominguez, but Danilo gives us something extra. So having Songare back as well would be, it gives Nuno a lot of options in the middle of the park now.
And finally, for this section, Nuno also reported that he is feeling positive over negotiations for a new contract for Ola Aina, and that will be, I think, a vital signing for Forest to tie him down to a new deal, an extended deal. And we've spoken about him so many times on the podcast this season, just how good he's been. On form, he's the best fullback in the Premier League, the best right back in the Premier League, and I think Forest have got to do all they can to keep him at the club.
Definitely, and I think I've mentioned this before on one of the match reports as well. So if you watch the little behind the scenes videos and stuff that they put out on TikTok and other social media, the three of them, Anthony Elanga, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Ola Aina, they obviously absolutely love each other and get on really, really well. And so, I mean, for I'm pretty sure that Ola Aina wants to stay. It just depends on getting the terms right.
And let's hope that is sorted sooner rather than later. We'll leave it there then. That brings us to an end to this week's Friday 5. My thanks to Baz, and thanks also to Rich for providing this week's stories. Thank you for listening as well. We will be back in your feeds with our match reports after the Fulham game. So until then, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge. From worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.